All right. So this is an interview with Paul Teller, and it's beginning now. Well, first of all, can you say something about what your interest in philosophy was?
Okay, well, from the beginning of my work in philosophy until 15 years ago or so, I did mostly philosophy of physics and also some more general philosophy of science. But in the last 15 years, I have gotten interested in some more general issues in philosophy. More specifically, I'm very much part of this group that wants to think about science not as a law discovering and applying enterprise, but a model constructing and using enterprise. And my new interest has been to see what the repercussions are for that for philosophy more generally. And here's the way that this way of thinking got started. One day it occurred to me, science is supposed to be the best of human knowledge and representation, but science at best gives us imperfect models, accurate enough for the job at hand, but never exactly correct. But if that's true for science, how much more must that be true for other areas in philosophy and really for human knowledge generally? And what I've been doing for the last 15 years has been largely following out that thought.
Could we just think about some things you've done yourself? You started off with a logic primer. What was the idea of that?
Oh, the logic primer came about because I had been using Richard Jefferies' logic text, which he wrote when he was teaching at City College in New York City. And I was teaching at University of Illinois in Chicago, and the book that was perfect for Jefferies' students at City College was a book that was perfect for my students at Chicago Circle. But then Jeffrey moved to Princeton, and he rewrote the book for a good book for Princeton students. And it was no good for my students because I was still at Chicago Circle. So I decided, okay, I'm going to write my own book. I'm going to mimic to some extent Jeffrey, and that's how I came to write a book. It really wasn't part of my other work in philosophy, and indeed I'm a little sorry that I wrote it because it never amounted to a whole lot. And although there are people who are still using it and really like it, but it didn't amount to a whole lot. It never sold a whole lot of copies, and I lost 2 years of research time writing that fool text. So, in a even more perfect world, or maybe I should say a less imperfect world, maybe I would have skipped writing that logic text.
And what about the interpretive introduction to quantum field theory? That's one of your most important books.
The first thing, Michael, is that I never would have been able to write that book without an enormous amount of help that I got both from you and from Gordon Fleming. And I want you to know how extremely appreciative I am. You worked with me so patiently, so closely, in such a good-natured way for years and years and years, and I never would have been able to figure all that stuff out on my own. So I wrote the book because I wanted to understand quantum field theory, and I know enough physics that I can do some of it, but I'm not a really good physicist, so I have to work at it really hard. And I wrote the book on quantum field theory that even I could understand, and also I think quite a number of other philosophers of physics who are not super good at physics, but good enough that they can read the responsible but boiled down account that you so wonderfully helped me write.
Yes, always. Now, you had a big argument with Nancy Cartwright. She had the laws of physics lie and the dappled world and so on, and she didn't believe that anything like unification would emerge and so on. What was your take on that?
I wrote a essay-length book review as a critical examination, not of Cartwright's program in general, but very specifically her, I think it was third book, The Dappled World. And I was dissatisfied with the way that book was written. I didn't feel it was written very carefully, and I was worried that because Nancy is so very much and wonderfully responsible for having gotten us all started on thinking about science in this much more accurate way, that people who are not part of this modeling group would read the book, also see its flaws, and say, well, if that's the kind of work that's being done in by the modelers, doesn't look as attractive as I wish it would be. So I wrote a book that set out in really kind of painful detail what I felt the dissatisfactions were, and with a point to saying that this is work that I think can be done better on this subject. I do really want to add that Cartwright is, along with Ron Geary, the two of them are responsible for getting the profession of philosophy of science off of this traditional view that science is a law discovering and applying enterprise, and to this much more accurate, what I believe is a much more accurate view that science is a model building and applying activity. And the world of philosophy owes Cartwright an enormous debt of gratitude, an enormous boatload of appreciation for doing so much to help us get us started on that way of thinking. But I didn't feel that The Dappled World was a big step forward in that. I think most of that work had been done very effectively earlier.
Now, what philosophers do you admire the most in your own work?
Gosh. I'd have to think about that. Well, although I disagree with him on not everything, but certain important points, Bas van Frossen. Bas has been enormously helpful as an interlocutor, both reading his material and discussing things with him in person and by email. My work has benefited enormously from working with Bas. Secondly, again, this is to repeat what I said earlier, Cartwright and Geary have done so much in redirecting thinking in philosophy of science that I feel is extremely valuable. And then, Michael, as I said earlier, you were so incredibly helpful to me in putting together that book on quantum field theory. So there are 4 people who've been very important to the work that I've been trying to do for years.
Well, thank you very much. And what I'm going to do is to interview with Paul Teller ending now, and
all right.
And I go to switch off a minute.
Okay.